This conversation started a little while ago about having a talk about communication, but I realised that communication in documentation, that we wanted a target or a subject for the talk, and we thought that might be a good label. So I'm a QS, a quantity surveyor. I trained as one. I'm not an architect, and I left being a quantity surveyor about 30 years ago. I've been working for architects ever since. I started on Parliament House, where they needed someone to define packages of work and write specifications. And there were 600 packages on that job, and so we had a little team of 5 people doing documentation, which was of specifications, which is quite good. We had an industrial chemist that could tear things apart and make sure it was all right, and a couple of specification writers. One was a crusty old bugger, he's probably my age now, but he was old to me then, 30 years ago, and he taught me how to write specifications and what the tricks were and what it was all about, and that was really a nice little exercise, and ever since that I've been stuck writing a lot of them for various projects at BBM. I've already enjoyed BBM. I wrote one for James he rang me up and said he needed help for the job in so I've worked with lots of people writing specifications, and I'm trying now, just as a bit of a lead in what I was trying to do with over the next year or so, as I sort of probably leave the practice, is have, when people want specifications written, if they say, can you help out? I can, but I like to work with people so that they know it's not hard, it's just, there's a system, so I just want you all to know that if you get stuck, and if I'm a bit busy, which I have been the last few weeks, I can't do it, but I would like to help on any project. So my parting gesture. So I noticed we talked about just then about the PALS thing, and there's a module on cost control. Now this isn't prepared about cost control, but I'm going to talk about it, but I will talk on the basis that a lot of the way the registration structure I understand is to do with small projects. We have big projects in here, but small projects. So a QS will almost never be involved in a small project. You'll get a client will know what it costs, and they tend to defer to a builder to get a cost. I say, I've got a builder who'll give me some alternatives. For you to give advice on cost as architects, I think the Institute says don't give advice on cost, or qualify by the words, this is an opinion of probable cost. I think that's the word they use. I've talked about this for a few years. And I reckon that scares the hell out of anyone, because what does it mean? So you could just have a look at the web. There are all sorts of people who will have general cost ranges for, if you're doing housing, base housing, middle range and top range, and it might be from 1,500 to 2,200 When you talk about alterations, it's probably double that. I don't know how you'll ever get around to pricing projects. It's just an art or a method of estimating, which is really scary, and you could find people committing money to projects where they're not really. I think it's safe that if you start to embellish or change and brief changes, and you get caught without the client who's upset the cost lower. So you could employ a QS, or there are builders type estimators, just to run over the project and brief them about what you intend, how you intend to finish the project, and what the essence of it is. It's that conversation on communication is what I wanted to talk to you about today. In that there's a very early stage of a project where you almost have to have the whole design in your head and get someone to understand where the money is. And that's a briefing issue. More of that later, I think. That's enough. Have I scared you enough about beginning pricing? I don't know. I think try and get some advice from someone else other than books if you can. It'll be a cost, and the cost will probably be something that a client won't want to pay for. But if we have, in this firm, if we have QSs that we work with, you'll find that they'll do that sort of work with you because there's a relationship. You build on relationships, so you get a little bit of help to talk that way. Opinions of probable cost is what it is. But so project cost control, which is the PALS module, I guess if you're talking about project cost control, I need to have a bit of advantage from you. If it's project cost control on small projects, you just have to keep testing it somehow. You do have to test with a builder or your quantity surveyor or QS.
So in the PALS book, they talked about going to something like Cordell or some kind of reference material that was familiarized itself with it. But I think it was really daunting to us as all architects sitting in the room and getting a professional QS to explain to us the methods that he used, because it was so precise. And often when we design, we just want to get an idea and guide the client through what he or she can achieve.
So, I mean, it is precise. I put this slide up here because how a QS thinks is probably a good way to start. Whether it's a quantity QS working in a big practice or QS giving you hands with a house or something, they think a particular way. They think in elements. They think of there's a system of elements. Maybe I can look at the next slide. There's a whole. Next one should be clearer. This. You talked just then about. It was very detailed. These are sort of the building elements that the QS will want to know about before they start pricing. Now they've got, for in their heads or in their records, they have a whole bunch of history of projects, thousands of projects normally, that they know how much buildings cost for a particular project. They know how much, reading through the elements, they know how much upper floors should cost. In a house, they know how much windows cost. So they've got this history of information they borrow from. And that's the way they think. They think a little bit different to the way a builder thinks. Builders think in trades, and this is not quite trades. This is a method, a system of understanding costs. But they always, as the project develops, they always come back to that little formula of elements. I put the slide before that was in here is just, that's about, there's 46, I think. 46 elements. Sorry, I just wanted to get out of my QS shirt and put that. Jump on in a minute. So the very systematic way of thinking, you've got, so they will ask you questions, even the builder's pricing person will ask you questions in those sorts of elements so that they can relate back to other projects and understand what's different about your particular project. So there's a communication required, there's an interview. Now, like on a bigger project or even little houses, you've got to spend the time with them to tell them how you feel a project which is really in your brain and not really gelling, how you see it and what the costs might be. And that's really hard. It's the real secret to getting good cost information. They should ask you about all the details, the elements, as they work through the project. Some people will just grab your drawings and apply rates. All I can recommend to all of you is that you have some time with the QS or the person who's giving you the estimates so they can get the feel of what you care about in the project. I'll talk a lot about what you really care about, because that can be cheap or that can be really expensive. It might be off-form concrete with forward finish. It may, whatever. So that time you spend talking and getting a brief, in the same way that you would like to talk to the client to get a brief, that particular consultant needs to know that sort of stuff. And the elements of how they think. So the QS builds the project in their head. They go through all the their training tends to be on construction. It's not to do with design, it's to do with how you build something. So they get into detail. And, I get into detail when and you know that I always ask lots of questions about detail. I'll move on. Like, as I said, just reading through it, the elements can be priced without having any detail. They don't necessarily need to have details. I can just say a floor as well as. On this project, we want to have timber floors. I want to set down. We want to have ducted air conditioning, duct underneath, whatever. Tell them. That's all. At a very early stage. Moving on. So contractors, I said contractors think the same way. They think in trades, but they also think in elements. So if you're talking to a contractor, there's a bit of a crossover. Specification writers, like me, we think in a different way. So communication with different people in the building project, there's a format for specification writing, and I know it's not in here. We're not meant to be talking about this to people who are sitting for the exam, because spec writing used to be on the course, no longer on the course. But specification writing has a system, and the systems that most people use is from a group called NatSpec, and they are a non-government organisation that develop domestic and building type systems. They don't think the same as contractors as QSs, but they do. It's a system. It's a structured way of documenting. So if you have to write specifications, there are systems of doing it, and just use them. So this is what the NCSA AAACA wanted to talk in their brief about how you'll be tested. And what I guess I wanted to talk about was getting the consistency in cost parameters, and that issue that I mentioned earlier about getting, when you start to brief someone who's pricing it, make sure that it's the same person and the same documentation every time, because you have an obligation to design a project to the cost. That's so there's a cost control mechanism that you'll have to establish. You'll have to check it at regular stages in the project. It might be schematic design, preliminary, 80% design, and we're ready for tender. We have projects in the office that often go out of over budget. So my first question, which is up there, what do you want from a quantity surveyor? It was up on the board earlier. Is really, you don't want to be redocumented. You want your advice to be such that you don't have to redocument. I think that's the business model you're looking for. So the more you can tell them what it is. Well, I guess we'll talk about docs and consultants. So the documents should be read by consultants. We'll come on to that. So that's what you guys do. I don't want the communication is the issue, I think, in our project. And drawings, I noticed that see a lot of drawings. We spend a lot of time in this office on drawings which aren't detailed. They're understandable. They're 3 dimensions, but they're not really comprehensible to building contractors. Building contractors get to know what it looks like, but they need a little bit of detail. And the detail in this office tends to be left for people to work through themselves or borrow from other projects. And I guess we have to be careful about that it's relevant through the project. When I joined BVN, we started a system of details which would be the history of all the projects we had, of having standard details for handrails, stairs, drywall partitions. And the problem was the BCA was changing every couple of years, and we had this base set of drawings that had a reference to BCA and to watch this clause. And the amount of clarifying or watch out clauses were really, it got bigger than the drawings. It just, every year it got worse and worse, so we stopped it and we actually took them off the system. So borrowing from other projects is okay, but be careful about complying with the BCA and standards. So, I mean, you guys all know this, that quality is, thanks to the model and on smaller projects, the drawings, that's what builders and QSs get their qualities from. They use materials come from schedules, or they're written on the drawings somewhere. And a lot of our projects have systems, so when you talk to these people, you need to think about all those things. I'll show you later about a project where that hadn't been thought about. All I had was a section with a whole bunch of references to wall finishes, but no one had actually thought about what they might be. And it was going for tender in another couple of days. It's not just a set of labels, it's a set of labels with some sense to it, so that someone can build it. Do you want to come in a bit? Are we okay?
Come back to that.
So in terms of communication to contractors or QSs, Paul Whitler had gave this great little talk about a month ago, I think, about designing. This is an OMA building, I think, and he said that his students took the building, drew it, then they started to expand on it and blew it up and just kept going in more and more detail, and they finished up with really detailed drawings, and that's the power of Revit. I still don't think there's probably enough in there to build it, but I think that will be the way we will be going in the future. I'm not seeing any examples of drilling down in any more detail than that on Revit. Please someone tell me if I'm wrong. We tend to stop at that point and go into 2D Revit, so adopting the model. If the model gets too big, it's too much information. Yeah, that's probably. Oh, well, these guys got this all from Revit, I understand. They did this. Yeah. But, sorry, from 3D. Yeah. Using the model. Here's a little building someone here is familiar with. This is a communication tool which I think is real. We're talking about communicating design, because I'll go back a couple. So lovely. If the builder understood what it looked like. In 3D, I find that 2D drawings easier to understand. I reckon this is an example. This one here. There's a bike shed sandwiched between two buildings. It wasn't really clear from the plan and the elevation, but the little sketch there shows it in the middle, and it starts to communicate a bit better to the builder or QS about what's required. We do a lot of this as well. Room data sheets with a little 3D, and I just think they're terrific. But and I believe that's generated very easily, because before we had Revit, I couldn't do it. There'd be sketches everywhere. It's just, I think on CSI Road, every room had a little, just about every room had a vision. Whether the furniture should be or not is a debate, because it shows coordination, but it doesn't show you. Stops you seeing the whole picture as a builder of a raw space. A couple of years ago, we did the Bangkok Embassy, which is being built at the moment. We had these little drawings of various important spaces. The Bangkok Embassy was a lump sum contract, and it's a little bit different to a package contract, because you all know that the difference. the builder priced exactly on our drawings for the whole project. This wasn't a slow release of documentation, that was it. So the documentation had to be 100% complete. So we had to communicate in a country that we weren't working in a lot more detail on the drawings, a lot more 3D images of spaces, just so they understood what what they had to build. And it's proving to be a pain. It's not working that well because they actually building the model and trying to build from their own. They took the model and building from that, but they're making interpretations which are a bit different to ours. So, organisation. Try and be organised. But we talk a lot about this in the practice directors and associates talk about getting organised on projects on how you're going to go about documenting. And that will go back to costing. That if you start to have a system in your documentation, organise what you're going to do, you'll find that you can, the communication lines through the project become a little bit more thorough. And it's that organising everything by programming what you're doing, understand what drawings you're going to be producing, mock-ups of drawings, and then doing. So I talk about the documentation in drawings, materials, products, systems, and specification, but the details are the ones that, as a builder, they care about. So I'll go through some examples of what you really care about, because on every project we do something that we all want to hang on to and we really care about, and we don't often let. It's hard for a builder to understand that if details aren't really done below and so thoroughly. Here's an example of this is a Bangkok window. Everything's detailed. I'm sorry we can't read it. Put on my bigger screen, but everything is detailed and noted on this drawing. And not many codes are used. It was thought that we put a lot of words to communicate. And the codes are okay, but you tend to lose what the essence of what you're trying to build when you just have a code saying a timber lining. That timber lining there is recessed, it's got little plugs that hold it, it's got a big flush with the skirting. It's an over-detailed project, but necessarily so. Ceilings, similar ceiling type drawing, where there are a few codes, but there are lots of written words. Now, I don't know how Revit deals with written words. I think it's easy to put codes on, isn't it, and start to explain in 2D. Am I right? That's okay? I'm just a big believer in writing down what you feel, communicating to people what you really care about. That lighting box is flush with the ceiling, and you don't want it sticking down like however it is, and just tell people.
I think the advantage of codes is that they're quantifiable in the model, so you can extract them and find them digitally.
You can use them in schedules, etc.
Yeah,
and you can change the schedule without changing the drawing.
And you can update all codes
Oh,
in one instant.
I'm not saying change the codes, I'm saying supplement the codes.
Yeah,
And I don't believe we do a lot of that here. I think lately we've been tending to code everything.
We've moved away from that. Quite in the few projects I've done recently, we've moved away. We used to do that all the time in microstation.
Because the builder, going right back to where I started, they need to know what you care about, what you really, what the bits that you're hanging out for. And I often get asked, why don't you put that in the specification? There's a point where they don't read the specification, because the specification is about quality. It's about standards, it's about what you have to do to submit samples, etc. But if you start to hide stuff in the specification, it gets missed. You know, when you get on site, you say, why didn't you do that? And you say, well, it's in the specification. And they go, yeah, but all the rest of your drawings are detailed. Why is that in the spec? And so consistency of approach is probably is important.
Just since you mentioned it, Peter, do you talk about in this presentation order of precedence in the documentation?
Contractually.
Yeah, and where would you typically put those drawings or those documents that say you're breaking down, drawings, details, specification, that kind of thing? Do you have, what's your feeling about the order of precedence? Do you think it needs to be transparent? Do you have an order of precedence that is a given, regardless of whether it's written anywhere?
Most of the clients we have will almost tell us how they want to see it. And I'll tell you what the contract is, and that will normally has a clause on precedence. Some don't have any precedence. Specifications are higher, they tend to be because of the quality. But when you start to get specification descriptions on drawings, it's a confused thing legally, but it's quite clear if you actually go to court. The drawing says this, and it's supported by specification. So precedence, I don't know. I'm not talking about precedence.
Sure.
But I just did. I think the precedence comes from some of our clients are builders, and they have a way of doing it. In fact, most of our developer type clients will say that.
The only reason I ask is I keep seeing it come up in projects, and whenever I've brought it up, a lot of people have never heard of an order of precedence. They're not even particularly sure if there's two conflicting pieces of information between two sets of documentation, what a rule of thumb or a general kind of like principle such as larger scale drawings override, small scale drawings or
every contract has a clause on precedence. Everyone does. It either gets struck out or it's in most contracts, or every contract, and you either delete it or you accept what they're saying.
Because so many disputes.
Clause in law that generally the specification comes first if nothing's been dictated otherwise. As a default.
There are, depending on who wrote the contract, master builders will probably not want the specification. They'll want some other way to architects or contracts. Because of the quality
Conversations on site.
Yeah. I mean, intuitively, so people elevate the specifications in the order of precedence, but intuitively most of us designers understand that something drawn, if it's drawn, particularly if it's drawn in a 1 to 5 or something like that one on screen, that's going to override everything. Doesn't matter what the specification says. You know what I'm saying? We don't talk much about the order of precedence, we only talk about it when something goes wrong. Yeah.
In fact, the specification really has a lot to do with when something goes wrong. Cover the practice and the project when you get into an argument. I put that drawing up. It's a bit fuzzy intentionally. It's a blast-proof door frame that is on Bangkok. All that steelwork, everything was detailed to hell because that steelwork is on the structural drawings. You have to refer to them. But we tried to give some cover up to the metal in the project. Embassies tend to be full of steel to hold the thing up when the bomb goes up. And we covered with timber, which in fact in Bangkok has turned out to be a good thing because the latest challenges on thermal transfer. They're worried about thermal condensation on the steel. But fortunately we covered all our steel with timber, so we thought about it, didn't we? And that's another blast. It's a blast window that's external to the big void. And there's very fine detailing. We had a specification writer called Kim Humphreys who did details on the project. He sat there and did little hand details of the problems he saw in someone doing one. It's a fantastic process. A luxury you don't have on lots of projects, particularly small. If you're doing houses, you detail what you care about. I like this little photograph because this is one of it's one of our former photographs, a series of former. We care about that sharp arrows. On the CSIRO project, we put this photograph, I think, in the tender documents to show this is what we wanted, and they say we can't do it in Canberra.
They also know there.
In Canberra, they can't do it. So I drove around Canberra looking for buildings with a right angle corner, and I found 3, but they were all done by Denton Corporate Marshall or someone else, and they said, well, we're not, this building isn't that standard. The fight was lost. We just couldn't do it. There was no concrete who was prepared to do it.
Don't talk chicken off before you do your documentation and you've got it up for double.
The whole set of people went into the project. This is just one how but they won't do it. They won't fit the budget. So this is a matter of budget and the communication I was talking about earlier. If you want right angle concrete corners, tell them straight out the front, because the concrete's double the price. In Bangkok, we've got this sort of concrete, and we have boarded formwork. Now, all of us would say boarded formwork must be more expensive. It's a double formwork, etc. James Gross went there about a month and a half ago and accepted that we have boarded formwork everywhere because it's easier for them to do. They can't get concrete like that in Bangkok. We've given up.
Can't get smooth concrete.
They get smooth concrete. They can't do sharp arrowses. They just don't. They always fall away. The vibrators spoil the inside, and it just doesn't work.
The labourers don't know how to do it.
Yeah, and we've had people training them. They get a couple right, so we've deferred to something which we actually prefer, which is bought for things, which is fabulous. Thank you. Yeah. Because they don't have to worry about the quality. I like this little. I'm talking about communicating to builders, so it's not just the words or the drawings or the specification. There are some images that we have hanging around our office, like this ductwork in this space. I don't know where it is. I think it's in ASB. It's fantastic. But if you start to talk to someone, if you want this sort of work in a project, talk early. Talk to the QS early. Get the builder early. Get them to know that you're not talking about a normal building. This is all exposed, and it's going to be, the galvanising has to be right, etc. So use whatever we've got to help in the process of talking. I put this little drawing in because of it's a ceiling on Bangkok, which was, when we went to tender, we had details and dimension drawings. We don't. I'll go to the next drawing, which is just a part of a project that happened recently. There's actually not a lot. The codes are all there. There's no set out, and I understand we're not going to do set out drawings because the fees have run out. So it's going to be a bit of a. They'll put it where they like. We just. Although the set out will be a mess, I think. It's a really small little project. And so to go back to that sort of detail, we always leave this to last, and the fourth construction issue, that's fine. And I think that's okay, but sometimes you just don't come back to it, and it's a mess on the side. So this is just the thing that I get often asked when I write a spec, and will it be useful to the builder? The first stage in writing a specification is very easy. I do lots of specifications in, however big the project is, in a night. It could be as big as a hospital. You can get something that won't be useful to the builder. It'll get you over the line to say, thought about, there is a specification. That's about it. The details I've been talking about, that's the next stage. Materials and details. That's what informs the specification. It's almost too early to start a specification when they say at 8%. It's only just ticking a box. I mentioned working on Parliament House when I worked with this older specification. He used to dally around. He not do much at all, just ask questions, which I want to be guilty of myself at the moment. What are you doing about this? And then all of a sudden it came together in his head and he crashed them out overnight, because that was the time he knew enough about the project to write a useful specification, not one that's only halfway there, because otherwise it just wasted his time. So I started to write a specification on this little building, which is a really hurried spec. And there's a legend in the corner that had a whole bunch of information there. Ceiling suspension system, carpet tiles. So the person that thought about all the materials on the project, they've done little sections, there are cross-references, and so I went through it. I said, what sort of carpet tiles? And they went, do I need to select them? I said, yes. And the downpipe, what is it? Is it steel? How's it been fixed, etc.? I went through it. Face brick, we haven't decided. The flashing, that was okay. Metal roof, well, I think it's going to be this. I went through all those things. A whole lot of decisions hadn't been made. Those, if we had a cost management system we talked about earlier, should have been decided way back. And you can vary them, but you've got to get, that's important to the project, which I understand now is $200,000 out of the budget, probably because we filled in those things and all of a sudden they went, oh. So if you're talking about cost management, I know you're saying you're making decisions early, because I noticed that in your speech today they're presenting the finishes now, the projects, at 90% almost, and we're still talking about finishes to the project, but hopefully those have gone into a cost program something about the project. But you need to know what you're talking about. So I'll start with this one. Now, I've used this as a little example. Someone will recognise this. There was a buyout that we had on CSIRO. It was a very simple thing. We were at the last point of trying to get some documentation out for tender. And this is a buyout at the entrance to the building where they have a security requirement. It's right in your face. So what is it? It's stainless steel. And it was an important thing because it was an important part of the project, but there were questions about thickness of stainless steel, finish of stainless steel, how is it fixed, do you care if there's a plate at the bottom, that front top corner looks a bit sharp, the people rushing by are likely to catch their clothes. There's a whole lot of questions on this one little piece going for tender that would not be priceable. You can't price it. So I'll leave you with that little drawing about communication, that you have to think about how am I going to build it. Not just the idea, but it's the detail.
It's fairly standard.
No, this is
a proprietary item.
No, this is an important buy at the entrance that had to have a plate on the top. So.
But a proprietary, an important, like a fancy proprietary buy would be better information.
Yeah, it would
you know, there's a place marker until you decide what your detail is. And,
but I knew it wasn't that, or we knew, because it's something we cared about. Going back to that little idea, because we cared about it, we had to really get into the detail. There's a drawing that follows it, not here, but we did, which had everything in it. It just had a steel sleeve that fitted over, and so you can remove it and replace it and get the wires in. It had a pad that goes on top, so it had little holes in it to take the more detail. But one little thing we cared a lot about, because it's the front of the building. I know we've got them everywhere. Yeah. So if anything you want to take away, just try and get what you care about onto the documents. That's what I want you to take away from today. Finish. Anything else? We'll go back to Ethel, the archive plus colleagues away.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, ask questions, please.
What are the incentives and what do they care about? Like, what is their main driver? Because I think as architects, like, we want to create beautiful buildings and we know that we want the details to work, but is it that they want to just lower the cost as much as possible?
No, they want to get paid.
Yeah.
And if they don't keep it to budget, do they get paid, or do they get further incentives if they lower the project cost even more?
Most quantity surveyors' clients are bankers or financiers of some sort, and so they want to make sure that if a project comes in on budget and not over, so we'll find a lot we'd be driven to reduce the cost. It's because way back when the project was first talked about, they said, well, it's a 50-story building, 1,000 square metres per floor, whatever it is. But just add it up, put a bit of a contingency on and say that's what it should cost. So the secret, speaking as a QS, the secret to as a quantity surveyor is never tell anyone any money until you've got as much information. All too often they give a figure that locks into people's brains when they can't get it out.
So what happens if they estimate and it's actually over budget, but prices come back and it's over budget? Do they not get paid, or?
Yeah, they get paid. Yeah. just if we have to
We're just gonna
redocument.
ask.
Still did the
So
work.
it's just the relocation that is,
No, well, I don't, they may have to rework their estimates, which might cost them some money, but they will simply say, I didn't have enough information to price it correctly. The way the defence have a different way of doing it. You take a defence project, like we do lots of big defence projects, they budget, they say, the QS will say, well, it's going to cost $1 billion. Defence have a 50% either way allowance when they start. So they'll have 1.5 billion down to 700, 500 billion on a big defence project. When it goes to design stage, that goes down to sort of a 20% allowance, 10%, then you get to the final tender. They've been caught too many times. When we did the Bangkok embassy, the budget was, I'm guessing, something like, the whole project budget was $200 million. That included all consultant fees, great contingency, variations in costing between Australian dollar, and they just got narrowed down and down and down too much. A tender of the way under budget. They're great because they have money left over. So, to inform clients, that's the way they will work. Banks won't work that way, or financiers, because they want to know if the project's worth doing. They're not benefactors like the government is. So to answer your question about do they get fined, I did it for 15 years, no one ever said you're not paying the bills.
But sometimes you have to be careful choosing a QS on any project that prices for different, either a bank or a government, because if you're using bank projects and they're pricing for the government, you can run into all sorts of trouble as well with the client expectation at play.
Yeah, I'll drive it down. I used to, when I was a QS, I'd always sit down for 3 hours with the architects and understand the project. I don't see that happening on any of our projects at the start. It was expensive, but I always got it right. I'd say that I always got it right, because you spend that time and you can ask those questions. Are the walls going to be timber lined? And remember, just going back to this, all these elements, the building, what we're talking about as architects, are only those first, the first 17, 18 elements, the rest are services. So the cost of the project is that we're involved with, although we impact on the others, is only about, I think they say 50 to 60%, there's all the services and site works, etc. So the cost control is not just the architectural works, it's also the services works, and you've got to make sure that they're informed and know it.
What are those elements from? What's the...
Oh, it's a standard. There's a cost control manual that the quantity surveyors have. We used to have one here that disappeared. We'll get another one in, actually, we should do, because it's the way they think. And so under that wall finishes, there's a definition of what wall finishes are. There's a little 10-line definition under each one of those, and so that you know where they all fall. Okay, there it is. More questions?
can I ask another question? It might be slightly different, but we're on this project where we have a managing contractor and we have several different packages. I'm just wondering how because they're really, they do a lot of work to keep the project in cost as well, and I'm wondering what their incentive is. Like, do they need to keep the project at cost if they have a design and construction contract where they're putting out different packages to tender anyway? Like, isn't the cost of the building just all of the packages added up, and how?
We'll never know. I worked on a project in Canberra where we were told we stuck up and we had $10,000 off our fees, and or with Bill or someone who negotiated $8,000 reduction in our fees because they reckon we'd stuck up. I heard from someone else, as a friend of mine happened to be the accountant working for the builder. They made a motto on the project. They were just doing it to everyone just to help their pockets out. So, who can you trust? So they may say that it's costing them lots of money, but maybe they have enough money in there anyway.
If you go through the managing contractor contract, there's a bonus at the end of the project for the managing contractor. If they bring it in, with a significant cost saving, they'll then get an additional bonus added to their expenses. So that's an incentive for them big time.
Sometimes
So they take it from us and they take it home.
Well, on UTS we had a very weird one. Like they got Richard Crookes got an incentive for delivering on time, and they had a range plus minus on the budget. They couldn't go below that or above.
Okay.
And they were very tight around the allowed budget because UTS didn't want the builder to just save money. Left, right, and center. They cared about the quality, so they said, we don't want you to go over, but you should not go under. So they had a very tight range. So we went through value management phase at some point, as you do. But then it turned out that we were spending less than what we should have, and so we got some money back to get, some finishes back in the areas that we cared more about and stuff like that.
So value management shouldn't be about money, it's about value.
Yeah.
It isn't money.
Yes,
necessarily.
so we saved in some areas and we got money back to be spent in the places that we cared about.
So they were really upfront about the arrangement?
Yeah, but UTS was.
Yeah.
Richard Crookes would have kept it to their chest, I would imagine.
Yeah, but we knew, because we worked closely with the UTS as an internal project manager, as well as Savills that were standard project managers. And their project manager was had a very good relationship with us, so we were
kept in the
yeah.
University of New South Wales works similar to in classes that I got to them, but when we did the other half of it.
They're quite good clients,
They monitored the cost of equity packages that they cost.
I worked on a project in Canberra where the builder had some money left over, declared it, and they got an art program going. They said, let's have some purpose designed seats for the public areas and outside. That'll be our donation to them. Yeah. Some people, they're not all bastards. I've been a builder as well, and that's awful.
You make lots of money though, or?
I often need to know. I travel around a bit. I was a QS. I worked in Sydney and London and Wellington. I went back home to Perth, and some mates of mine were running an architectural practice, but they had a building company on the site that was in the red, and they said, "You want to come and manage the practice? Yeah, we'll get out of the red." So I learned about driving subbies really hard to save money. But I was only there for a year and a half, but we went from the red to the black. So, but when I said it was awful, it was just
in the trenches.
Oh, in the trenches, and also doing that bit about writing letters to subbies in unsyllable words because and saying you actually stuffed up basically because it was a legal thing and had people crying off. I don't know. They couldn't feed their kids. And, we didn't have any money to pay people. And that was real. But anyway, it's a life experience. It's good. So I have a little bit of a business thing hangs over my shoulder about a little bit ruthless. So.
Did you see any architects be structured in that way? Like any examples of kind of winning fees based on?
Yeah, I think we're doing some projects where there's bonus for winning the competition, and if you bring it in, I'm sure I'm not part of it, but I'm sure the principals do that. Why not?
Is it a general arrangement that in Australia a QS is something that's done? Because in Austria I used to work in an office, we had a guy, he was an architect, but he was really interested in that stuff, and he priced everything. And we were also responsible for the budget, but we always got there. And the good thing is if you have it internal, you can shift budget around.
Yeah,
you don't have any influence about what the QS is doing because you just don't see it now.
But you should. You should start talking to them. Get them in. They're getting paid. talk to them.
Yeah.
And if you want to change something, talk to them.
Yeah.
Is it going to hurt? They won't like it because it's not in their fee, but otherwise you're going to be redocumented. What do? Appeal to the project manager. You want to work with them.
And using that method too, I've done in the past sort of on residential projects, because you own that information then, and so that you can work with it, but also you don't have to dissolve that or be transparent about that information to your client, so you can go in there with confidence about an opinion of probable cost, but you don't necessarily have to show them the detail, because you know that there's scope within it and to move and shift, and if you put, like you said, if you put a dollar value at day one, they just fix onto that and will not budge.
Avoid as much as you can.
Or on the other side is that it scares the shit out of them, and you no longer have a project, because their expectation of what something should cost is not necessarily what the project costs.
So we put it in your benefit to education.
Yeah.
Work.
Yeah, but you just got to be careful how, it's a slippery road at the start, so you want to, give them a design that they want, or do you just sort of end up not doing a project at all? So it's a whole trust thing from the start, so, and it takes time to build that trust, so you kind of, you have to, yeah.
When I was saying I used to give lectures, when they had these talks on this architectural registration in Canberra, I did a couple of lectures with other architects who talked about how they ran small practices. It was interesting that the way they control costs is they have their joiner, and you would do a kitchen, $30,000. So they got rid of the problem. They said, if you don't employ me, my joiner.
That's the other way around, or your builder. You just use
my
your
builder, and I know.
Because they know your details, and you know how they build to a certain quality. And
that was quite a lot of our house builders did that. They just had their favourites, and they got lots of work. And they knew what their fees were, not much.
A lot of shorthand communication, actually.
Yeah.
You don't actually have to detail
Yeah,
everything.
exactly.
Yeah. And you don't have to go through that process of tender on small projects. It's so varied, and you can get 4 tenders in, and they'll be just so different from each other. And it just depends on whether the builder wants to do the job or not. That's the price they put in. They haven't even looked at the drawings, or they haven't even got subcontractors breakdowns or anything like that. So sometimes it's just easier and quicker to go with a builder from day one.
I worked on a project in Singapore that was about 300 million. It was quite big, 20 years ago, whatever it was. And Aldo Jurglis, because I was a Kiwis, he sent me there to talk property surveying to them how a person who'd done Parliament House was likely to detail the next job. So I was there quite often, and when the tender opening came on, we were saving money what to do, to the documentation. The tenders opened for the first package, which is $110 million. With the client around the room, this many people, and opened, the winning tender was, he came in and he had a figure of 180 million, and the guy who ran the government department stood up and said, fantastic figure, now you'll knock $10 million off it, won't you? He said, yep. And so all that stuff you do, sometimes it's just wasted. It's just wasted. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, I had a whole, I had 2 parts, that makes the whole.
No, I'm going to have another one.
Across the road, supposed to here for a week.